Hello, everyone in Zoom, and those of you who are joining us on YouTube live stream. I am Henry Crawford, and welcome to the June 2021 edition of Poets versus the Pandemic. Tonight, we're featuring poet John Odell reading from his new book, Sons and Tattoos, along with Reuben Jackson and Susan Okie. Joining me tonight as co-host is WordWorks founder, Karen Alanier. I want to thank all of you who've been with us over the past year and who've supported our program, which is about providing a reading space for poets during this time of the pandemic. Let me also thank the WordWorks for their help in making all of this possible. So let's get started. First, and most importantly, we want you to purchase the poets' books. So I'll put a link later on into the chat that will take you to the places where you can purchase the books of each of our poets tonight. We also have a donation button on that page, so don't feel shy about donating to our program. We at WordWorks and Cafe Muse will thank you wholeheartedly. I'm also going to put into the chat a link where you can follow all of our WordWorks online readings. Sign up on the registration form and you'll get on our mailing list to receive Zoom links for all our readings. Now, if you would want to ask a question of our poets, feel free to drop a question into the chat and we'll try to get to as many of them as we have time. A couple more things. Please join us on Monday, July 12, 2021, when Cafe Muse Online will present Catherine E. Young and some of the wonderful poets whose work appears in the collection Written in Arlington. And then we'll be back here again on PVP on July 21, 2021, with a special themed program dedicated to poets who have worked to present poetry readings in the DC area. And we'll have in that program Miles David Moore, Lucinda Marshall, and Ann Becker. So let's begin with John Odell. In addition to Sons and Tattoos, John Odell is the author of 2 poetry collections, Painting at Night and At Beauty's Pawn Shop. He was the recipient of an Individual Artist Award from the Maryland State Arts Council in 1997. His poetry has appeared in the Potomac Review, the Baltimore Review, the Birmingham Poetry Review, the George Mason Review, the Atlanta Review, and others. John's work has also appeared in several anthologies, including Free State, A Harvest of Maryland Poets, As Hungry as We Are, and Maryland in Poetry. John was born in Australia and shares an Australian connection with Susan Okie, who I'm told will have a little more to say about that in her reading tonight. I was very, very fortunate just a couple of months ago to have seen John at a reading. And so I know that you are in for a real treat tonight. So without more, let's bring John Odell up to the Poets versus Pandemic stage. John, feel free to unmute yourself and have at it.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. A special thanks to Poets versus the Pandemic and to Cafe Muse and WordWorks. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Looking forward to reading for you. As Henry said, I have a mixed heritage. My father is was an American sailor. My mother was an Australian school teacher. I was born in Australia during World War II, and we immigrated to the States shortly thereafter. This collection, Sons and Tattoos, delves into those places and those people. It's kind of a family and memory take on my life up to this point. So I'm going to start with a poem about my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, and his name was Charles Miller. And the poem is called They Always Wore Hats. They always wore hats, the men of my grandfather's generation, or so say the 4 photos of him that survive. 50-year-old black and whites, Charles Miller fleeing the Prussian soldier Bismarck would make of him, landed in Sydney Harbor looking backwards, like most others reassured yet troubled by the empty ocean at his back. He had an impulse toward husbandry. In these photos, he holds wrigglers, a cat, a child, a barefoot squirmer, a thumbsucker. The earliest is taken in the bush. Huge hands grasp hips, standing before a starving cow, a saddled horse in a half-cleared paddock. The horse all but faded from the photo now, as the droughts would later airbrush them all from the landscape of gum tree and burnt grass. Coal made him wealthy in the city, and after his wife died in the 30s, he sailed the world. In China, he saw a man executed, beheaded, I'm told, but not why he standed in the crowded street watching, or if it was good schooling for his own leaving. A sudden heart attack in a busy Sydney street, life severed as cleanly as the keen morning light by the brim of his hat. And now I would like to move to the other side of the family, and that's my grandmother on my father's side, and that's Grandma Chandler. And she was a woman who spent all of her life in Illinois. Grandma Chandler. Chandler, the name on the stone says, yet she lies not amongst them, but on the other side of the small cemetery. She rests there beside the one who left their bed for burial 50 years before her, when tuberculosis made widows common as the cornstalks rustling in October's weakening sunlight. After the Psalms, the crushing avalanche of earth lightened wagons retraced its muddy ruts. They led to a farm, 2 children to raise, a mattress that swore he'd never lain there. Why she married, then buried a Chandler 2 world wars later, she never thought worth explaining, but she drove his Model A forward, tires spitting the gravel of country roads, clashing through years as she clashed with him, her sons, the women they'd married, her years' unceasing abundance. All their farms failed, her sons fled, but she remained, a stone taken in the orbit of another carved a half-century before. The next poem deals with the courtship of my mother and father in Sydney. I'm guessing that this would have had to have taken place in the 20s, early 30s, perhaps. This poem is called Truth and Trawling. Dropout farm boy, American sailor. When my father came to Sydney in the late 20s, he fell in love. Plain, city-bred, Irish-German, she took him trawling one night at DY. In darkness, he spoke of marriage. Truth and sailors, her draft-dodging Prussian father began, and she listened, smiling at the thought of their surprise when very soon Miss would be Mrs. On their honeymoon, she tried golf in a narrow skirt, eyed his camera like a time bomb, knowing the spell would explode. He'd see her, then her fumbling duckling self. Next week, next month, if chance were on her side, he'd hold her up to the light, careful with his fingers not to smudge their bliss, and shake his head in disbelief as he had when his shot sliced wide into the sand. Then he'd hear the rattle of an anchor chain pulled and dream of beautiful harbors where no woman knew his name. She learned to wait and then not wait anymore. She waited, studying him, his empty duffel in their bedroom closet. He put the photos in an album and put their honeymoon away. She learned what waiting meant, his snores rattling beside her. She soon dreamed her own strange harbors. Next poem is a poem, a birthday poem. It occurred in 2008. You may remember that alignment of Jupiter and Venus, and it happens every 44 years. And I just happened to look up, and there it was. So this is called Align, December 1st, 2008. Of course, it's happened before and will again in 44 years. Leisure, chance, not intent, offer up this evening gift. Turn my eyes millions of miles upward to study an elegant triangle, proving only the generosity of miles and time, mind's hunger for pattern and line. My radio prophesied, told where and when to look, but I'd forgotten. I'd never seen, and no, I won't see again that lustrous thumbnail lining up with Jupiter, dim suitor, above and to the right of Venus, the far candles of my birthday sky. When we first aligned, my father, mother, and I, a worried Yank sailor on leave, a tired Aussie teacher, their child in a hot Sydney hospital, Mars ruled the time, madly out of joint. Our journey, our years together seem tonight remote as the stars, unfound through any telescope. Yet I do find them, connect them to this night sky, to 2052, with even lines of wonder and thanks. Well, we've been out on the ocean, we've been to DY, so we might as well figure out what fish think. This poem is called What Fish Think. And it starts with an epigram by a Chinese author whose name I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, but the anglicized version would be something like Hui Zi. So what fish think? How do you know what the fish think? You're not a fish. They hope for elegant presentation on a dish made by a master in love with his brush, or they dream of fresh fallen plum blossoms in icy water, flickering in the lanky shadows of mountains miles from the intrigue of nets or a cormorant's cunning. They think of insects mesmerized by the sky's last sleight of hand, and of smooth pebbles, dark, buried leaves, minnows veering madly always toward tomorrow. They think of all the fishermen drowned last year in floods. They think of 1,000 poems they'd write if they were poets and not carp. Don't tell me what I don't know, Wee Z. We're all fish. Go to the nearest stream and listen. My father had, as a merchant marine and as a sailor, a thing called a seaman's wallet. It's a brown leather wallet that fairly large, but it fit evidently in whatever trousers those poor sailors had to wear. Those bell bottoms we all wore in the 70s. There you go. So anyway, I have inherited this wallet, and it's one of my real treasures. It's called the Seaman's Wallet. Who was he? The wallet answers number 530836, issued by the Department of Commerce. Its rivet-studded brown leather cover shows a ship with twin stacks, pennants flying, and from each sloping funnel curves not smoke, but a sharply etched question mark. A tattooed rose bloomed on his left forearm. He had cholera and typhoid shots, weighed 170 pounds, was a serious man. In his passport photo, a fountain pen bulges in his coat pocket. A wiper, an oiler. He carried sweat and diesel in his canvas duffel with a discharge from the Marine Devil. In Boston, San Diego, or Sydney, he looked for or left the James D. Trask, the Pawnee Rock. War's tide bore him to us. Its commerce shanghaied him away. The tandem question, When would he return? We learned it was to be with the others, the fighting finished, to plant corn, thresh wheat, bale sweet alfalfa, stack it till a roof, a barely closed hayloft door allowed no more. He farmed and found out what he'd missed by running away from hay. The furrows his tractors wake, he plowed spring and fall till earth closed over all, and now laps patiently against memory's stubborn stones. The title of my book, Sons and Tattoos, of course, my father had tattoos. My son has a tattoo. I have no tattoo. My daughter is hopeful that my 80th birthday will bring that to a close, but I don't think so. So anyway, Sons and Tattoos. When we pulled off wedding rings, our son, 17, wanted a tattoo, a red guitar to shriek from his shoulder. United in this and nothing else, as if our flesh, not his, would burn beneath the needle, we flinched at the idea, tried to counsel him about infection, said it would cost, hurt. Our trump, it would be forever. So what's wrong with that, he asked. We strummed through the changes of all his hypothetical futures, fortissimo at the unforeseeable turnaround. He smiled sincere pity at our ignorance. Now the divorce is final, and I live in a neighboring state. When he visits me, he brings a guitar to help bridge our growing silences. I study the flaming ink on his shoulder, but see my father's forearm, his tattoo, a stout coil of rope knotted to a thick blue anchor, unmoored at the end only by death's unfailing tide. There on an arm that held me in its crook, my bare arm offers no anchor, no coil of rope, no red guitar. It feels bare as I listen to my son's B.B. King licks. The next poem is a poem called Places to Stay. And we have been watching some of the lead up to what may or may not be the Summer Olympics, but the poem opens with some references to gymnastic judging, but I think goes a little further than that. It's called Places to Stay. Where yesterday, today, tomorrow execute seamless somersaults, and on all judges' cards, perfection's double digits. Where new joy shares your wide bed, and guilt's key never fumbles at the lock. Where disappointed again, fear slouches away down the nameless alleys of all the cities you'll never visit. Where winter's shortest day is long enough, its deep quiet at dawn, fresh snowfall, awaiting only the tracks of your delight. The next poem deals with actually the cover of the book, Sons and Tattoos. It is an actual photograph taken on my first day in the United States. It pictures me as a child of about 4, my poor mother loaded with packages, and sailors bringing up the rear behind me on a busy street in San Francisco. And the title of this poem is called There. Mom becomes mom, Aussie accent discarded as easily as the wool shorts and cardigan of arrival. I keep the photo, her words about it. I always wondered about those sailors behind us. Where were they going? What became of them? The street photographer got some of this onto his negative that first American day. I used the wider angle lens of over 60 years. It's easy, love. Just put one foot in front of the other, and before you know it, we'll be there. Seized by here's kaleidoscopic pigeon feathers, shadows, cable car din, I knew chill air. I'm for know nothing beyond the instant's quite narrow matting. Mum and camera miss exiles, 25 years looming up between her and a foot on a Sydney street, a past thinning, fading with coils of cigarette smoke on the ceiling of our room at a Polk Street hotel. We wait for a man, a ship, a future, a week overdue. Higgledy-piggledy sidewalk shadows are the only answers I can offer you, Mom. We are going where those sailors went. Study the shadows. It's easy. Put one foot in front of the other. They get us all there. Next poem deals with an Alaskan experience, and it starts with a quote from Archibald MacLeish. And it is, I think, what we as all poets do, and that is ask for more. Asking for more. Do you ask more? Do you ask to travel forever? That's from Archibald MacLeish in his poem, Tourist Death. Not long before he died, my father went north, bored his Studebaker through a wide redwood, puzzled over the trees of mystery, posed my mother before totems, trading posts, then beside a mountie, the milky waters of Lake Louise. Now I approach the sheer wall of years he stood upon when he made that trip. I too find myself following a needle's northern urge, looking at ravens' wooden preening, hearing his hoarse morning cries, the afternoon thunder of calving ice. Salmon shove against the creek's unyielding flow, fight for and win the death that birth ordained, and in their spawning outruns. I stand halfway across a Ketchikan bridge, refusing the river's infallible instruction, in steady drizzle, in silence. This is called breaking the drought. Sleepless, we listen while a broken windmill clatters in the paddock across the road in hot night wind. With no moon, burnt hills bivouac around us, their rocks grinning wider, while the river skulks from the alarm, shrivels a brown snake's molted skin. It creeps to its bed, a fugitive from tomorrow's marauding heat. At dawn, it wakes to the windmill's dogged clanging, pushes back thick sheets of the Queensland rain it dreamed. When the sun returns, the skulls of cattle glisten beside spilling banks. At night, the sky's bleached horn fords the river, and idolatrous herds scramble the steep banks to charge the routed hills of broken drought. Another river that was important to me was a river on a farm in Illinois when I was a child, outside of Vandalia, Illinois. At the river, when I looked up, I saw tall willows again, my father's hands outstretched to grasp, then cut the perfect branch, knife blade afire in hot summer sun. I heard him, head bent, humming to his son, the jigging river swollen with yesterday's rain, his own green summers hidden just downstream. I did not see then those hands at my arm's ends, his monster boot prints stamped beneath my feet. The bark is new and bites my tongue as he instructs. Here, you try, just blow, not too hard. So sudden, this shrill sound, but who'd believe it could be silenced, hidden for years with freebooter clouds around a riverbed. At the river, I look up another 50 summers downstream, see those arching willows, and hear again a whistle's sharp second song snatched once more beneath listless trees. When we got ready to come back to the United States after 7 years, I had to renew my passport. In order to do that, I had to go to a place called Dubbo, New South Wales. Some of you may be familiar with Dubbo. But anyway, I ended up there getting my passport renewed. After only 30 rutted miles, I reached the family operation, a studio where the bush begins. Inside, only game in town Phil, with a tattered black umbrella sprouting from a wobbly tripod, shows albums of walrus-teethed children, wedded bliss careening toward the wrecking yard, and golden couples who sag along with the screen at their backs. It's my turn now to face Phil, who fiddles with the camera, offers no blindfold as we take each other in our sights and aim. The umbrella fails, my eyes lie buried in unreachable shadow, resisting chemical seduction. As the mind's lens counterflashes, I feel the lack of all lawful aid and protection, see the impossible odds of avoiding alteration, addition, or mutilation. I must be getting close to my time, right, Henry? I think. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna close with a poem called "Running Home," and it starts with a quotation from Emily Dickinson. Emily said, "I always run home to awe when a child, if anything befell me." In white, in that high Amherst room she seldom left, what did not befall Emily? No longer a child, awe yet welcomed her fledgling home from 1,000 doubtful skirmishes, incandescent ecstasies, small inky whirls, pen pirouetting across paper in a ballet of transports, dismayed retreats. She choreographed her weft of sly feints, advances, differences, delicious paradoxes, bold ascent to her waiting mother wonder. We see her home, trot along beside her on a carriage ride, her first and last surmise. Thank you all so very much.
Reuben Jackson has served as a curator of the Smithsonian's Duke Ellington collection in Washington, D.C. His music reviews have been published in the Washington Post, the Washington City Paper, Jazz Times, and on NPR's All Things Considered. Reuben is also an educator and mentor with the Young Writers Project. He has taught poetry for 11 years at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland. He is also a founding member of the New Music Theater Workshop and currently serves that organization as a librettist. His poems have been published in over 40 anthologies. His first volume is Fingering the Keys, which was honored with the Columbia Book Award. He is currently an archivist with the University of the District of Columbia's Felix E. Grant Jazz Archives. And finally, on 2013 until 2018, Reuben Jackson was host of Friday Night Jazz on Vermont Public Radio. You know, one of the pleasures that I have putting these shows together is I often ask the poets, who would you like to read? And Reuben's name has come up twice. So he is he's a repeat offender. He's a recidivist here on the show. This is his second performance. His first performance was back in August of 2020. And it was one of the highlights of that evening of Poets versus the Pandemic. So I am really happy and glad to bring back to PVP, Reuben Jackson.
This first piece is from Scattered Clouds. It's Fingering the Keys and Newer Poems. Came out in fall of 2019, which now seems like about 50 years ago. But this the title comes from an old song by Patti Page entitled "Old Cape Cod." If you could stand above this part of Massachusetts, you would see how the land crooks like a beckoning finger, how winds have gnarled the trees. You could follow this car to its destination, but don't. I could see you dropping an enormous workload from the sky. Either that or a postcard which said, "Dear Reuben, let me tell you about the heat wave and string of homicides you missed." You would coat the air above Wellfleet with music when I want to listen to Coltrane, work on my kissing, look at the stars. The next two poems are about Jimi Hendrix, and they're taken from an anthology edited by Richard Peabody a few years ago called Fiction and Poetry Starring Jimi Hendrix Kiss the Sky. And it starts with an epigraph from one of the last concerts Hendrix performed at where he performed is like the Isle of Wight Festival in August of 1970. And he was a little frustrated with people who were, I think, understandably, but they were wedded to his older material. And so the epigraph, the title of the poem is "The Cry of Love," but the epigraph reads, "Y'all want to hear all those old songs, man? Damn, we're just trying to get some other things together." Jimi Hendrix, August 1970. Another hand to shake, another reporter whose questions are crowded with ghosts. Passing a mirror, I notice this sad smile and recall the unrehearsed joy of 1967. I have circled this planet more than the sun, which also doesn't take requests. Some nights when I plug in my guitar, I think of loving someone, some still unnamed woman with the same care, and of a home where sunlight finds a spot on the kitchen table and remains stubborn as a groupie, non judgmental as the wind frisking the afro above my tired eyes. The next piece is Jimi Hendrix at 49. Now, you probably know he died at the age of 27, but I'm thinking it's a fantasia, a fantasy, obviously, and just a bit about the genesis of this poetic attempt. People have often remarked the fact that Morgan Freeman, at certain points in his career, resembled Jimi Hendrix, and apparently Morgan Freeman was in a production of Othello, and he came out on stage, and someone yelled, "Jimmy, you're back!" So that starts the piece, and we'll just go from there. So Hendrix at 49. Some misinformed folks spot me and call out Morgan Freeman, just as someone interrupted his stint as Othello to request Purple Haze. I still get letters from fans wanting to know which brand of lighter fluid I used on that guitar back in '67, and as if my records with Ladysmith Black Mambazo and Miles Davis never happened. Meanwhile, Mick Jagger dyes his hair trying to reassure aging fans. But the day my stomach was pumped of all that purple bile was the day I took my money and built trees around what was left of my spirit. No endless string of farewell tours for me. You can't even find Grecian Formula 16 in my general store. Okay. Um, this piece, two more short pieces. I did do radio in Vermont for a number of years of Friday night jazz, and I started doing radio there when I was 18. I feel fortunate to be. I'm alternating Sundays with Larry Applebaum, who hosts a show called The Sound of Surprise on WPFW, and I tell people, that I've been a radio nerd my whole life. I used to sneak the transistor in the bedroom at night and listen to. Well, you'll hear some of it here. So this piece is called Radio Nights. Left hand working the dial quietly, quietly. My parents heard everything. A young safecracker in search of late night beauty. Sam Cooke's transformational yearning, or Sam Cooke's transformational yearning. The bebop rapid tongues of DJs sharing sometimes harrowing headlines. They too kept me awake, scared the patriotic out of me. One night I dreamed I asked Otis Redding if I could sit with him, another gifted black protector at the dock of the bay. And I'll close with this. It's has no title, but you know how it is when you're kind of people call them drafts. I say if it's not quite a draft, it's more like a zephyr, like a lot of wind, and there's a lot to do, you know. But here we go. Never once had I seen a poet in dull brown orthopedic shoes like mine. Nerdy glasses, yes. The stoop I nursed in front of my parents' house was my mending wall. Semi-respite from the neighborhood's rage. Who knew that beneath my guarded gaze, I was rifling through the drawers in my head for words I'd use to praise mountains. So there you go, the mystery bard. Thank you all for the opportunity to share poetry with you again. Sorry about the poetry, guys, but I think it's my Zoom weariness is showing, you know. So thank you.
Reuben Jackson, wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next and last poet is my good friend, Susan Okie. She has rendered tireless service to Cafe Muse and WordWorks over the years. She is a joy to work with there, and as a collaborator in the Surrey Street Poetry Group, where we work together. Susan is a doctor, a poet, and was the Washington Post medical reporter and science editor. Her work has appeared in the Prairie Schooner, the Gettysburg Review, the Bellevue Literary Review, the Journal of American Medical Association, the Cider Press Review, Hospital Drive, Innisfree Poetry Journal, Gargoyle, and Beltway Poetry Quarterly. Her poem, Perseid, was chosen by Michael Collier as the first prize winner in the 2012 Bethesda Poetry Contest. Her collection, her chapbook is entitled Let You Fly, and that was published in 2018 by Finishing Line Press. It gives me immense pleasure to bring up my colleague and friend in poetry, Susan Okie. Go for it.
Hi, thank you, Henry. And thank you, Cafe Muse. Thank you, Henry, for making this series happen. And John Odell and Reuben Jackson and Karen, our founder and co-host on this program. I am going to start with the poem that I always think of as my evocation of the muse. Elizabeth Bishop injects herself with adrenaline for asthma. A fine needle in your arm opens your chest, raises you to a high pitch, sets you humming all night. Saved from drowning, you float on the surface, gulping breaths, heart at a Scarlatti gallop. And how the lines come in a fine tremble as your fingers grip the pen to make illegible stitches on the moon white. Lend me your waterfall. I want to watch the fireflies floating up the wooded ridge at Samambaya, to hear your gardener, Manuelino, singing to his donkey. Let me dive with the riverman to the place where Luandina, the serpent goddess, will blow her cigar smoke into my mouth. So the second one is a memory from medical school, but people who I've gotten good teaching from have also told me that this is kind of a signal poem for me in the way I see things. So I'm going to read it next. It's called In the Anatomy Lab. That night I unwrapped only her right hand, and sat, probing to free the lovely network of cables in her palm. Some impulse made her give her body. I didn't know her name or one thing about her life. When I tugged on the flexor digitorum tendons, her fingers partly closed and her thumb crooked in. I seemed to see the two of us as if from outside and could no longer name the tendons. I felt my fingers from inside her hand. Soon I would open the gates of her ribs, would hold even her heart in my palm. Always afterwards home, to feel your palms circling on the small of my back. So some of the poems I picked to read tonight are about parenthood, being a parent, being a mother, children. And John also wrote about his parents. So I've got a poem like that too, in a sense. This one is called Two Mothers. Hannah comes in like the sun, gathers up my 3-year-old who laughs to feel her hug. She doesn't grab the baby, Jacob, waits to see where she'll fit in the network of our needs. Maternity leave's over. I want her as my mother. Of her life, I only hear the outline. She fled Cameroon, husband's always working. His mother in Virginia tends their child while Hannah cares for mine. That feels wrong. Not to worry, she tells me. In their culture, it's grandma's job. When Jacob cries, she wraps him in a shawl on her back to ride while she does dishes. Evenings, my breasts aching, I hurry home to nurse, but she can never let him cry when he wants a bottle. My milk dries up, unneeded. Walking one summer morning, Jacob at 2 holds my hand on the lane beside our house. I'm chatting with another mom when he spots Hannah coming. He lets go, runs ahead to greet her. How wonderful, my neighbor murmurs. That's what you want. So our family then, a few years later, when Jacob was 5 and our older son Pete was 8, moved to Kenya for 3 years because my husband was a malaria researcher. We're both doctors who met in medical school, and we wanted to go to Africa, and he wanted to go there and do research. So we lived on Lake Victoria in Western Kenya. And this is The Rains Begin in Western Kenya. All through the dry season, I swallow my tears. I don't sleep, eat without tasting, wander the house without seeing my children. Across the Atlantic, my mother has died. Tunes from the Requiem of Mozart sing day and night in my brain. On the morning, the air tastes different. A wind rustles, ignites scarlet blossoms on the flame tree, as if to burn the branches to ash. Giant toads appear like stones, stick out their tongues at the sky. Night, thunder, waterfall of rain. From the lake, flying ants rise into the sky over marshes, villages, drop into the mouths of toads, dogs, children, fill everything that is empty. This is another poem from Kenya, Willie of Kisumu. Why of all the street boys is it Willie at my gate, banging on the bars? When I walk out, he calls me Mama, asks to come in, play with my sons. He might be 8 or 12, spindly legs in frayed shorts, a worn Celtics t-shirt from the secondhand clothes market, cheeks stretched tight over his skull. Stunted, hungry, charged by glue he sniffs with other boys to ease the pangs, keep sleep away. I don't know where he was born or how he came to wander this lakeside city on his own. He hangs out at the home for orphan boys run by the priests not far from our hedge, across the pitted ring road where rusty trucks play chicken with pedestrians. I let him in once to try a video game. Two bouncy brothers who bump off ghosts and swallow gold coins. He makes my sons uneasy. He craves their toys, proposes swaps, a slingshot made to kill birds for a plastic truck. They've asked me not to let him in. He knows not to rely on anyone, but he tries me, promises he'll go back to school if I give him the shillings to buy books, my weak spot. I hand it over and he disappears. Next time, perhaps a new story, but the same questions and the eyes that freeze me, old as stars. So one more Kenya poem, and this is called Women's Work, Kisumu, Kenya, and it's for Judith Mukhanyi. The day I drove to find a maid for the new doctor, Judith sat behind me with a friend, teeth flashing in my mirror, the sun in and out of clouds. Rainy season potholes cratered the ring road. Whenever I hit one, I had to ease the wheel out slow. From the back seat, Swahili jokes I didn't get, alto guffaws. We're talking of pregnancy, she told me. Once they come out, you can't put them back in. That winter when 3 of hers visited from school, it was my youngest who set the hedge on fire. His sobs, flames, climbing the dry green, no answer at the firehouse, so we pushed the panic button to call a security truck. A pickup unloaded young men who tore off leafy branches, dipped them in a water bucket, beat the fire out. Okay, so this poem, the next one, is the reveal about the connection. John's parents met in Australia. My parents met in Australia too. My father was an officer in the Army. My mother was a WAC in the Army. They were both stationed in Australia and later Manila, and they were behind the lines in the Pacific with a bunch of typists and translators and stenographers, transcribing and preparing testimony from captured Japanese prisoners to send to MacArthur's troop, I guess, wherever they were. So this is my parents' picnic on Corregidor. Noon light from beyond the rough pavilion almost blinds the camera. Thicketed by jungle grass, 5 officers, fading to white and gray, are eating in a mess hall where their enemies once took their meals. I can't stop staring at the man looking down through wire rims, hair much fuller than I ever knew it. Father, young, bare-chested in the heat, with that familiar air of being elsewhere. A day's leave, the war a month over. There she is, mother, dark curls straggling down her forehead, turned away from him. Her eyes accuse the camera, sandwich up to hide her mouth, while he, ropey-muscled, grabs an olive. They're shaded by shingles laid across the shelter's ruined roof. What do they talk about away from tents and typewriters, their long work of transcribing captured soldiers almost done? Australian beers and canned turkey, the chow absorbed us pretty thoroughly, my father scrawled. Snapshots mailed home. First date, maybe. She, black Irish, skinny, all those lucky strikes. And I know she's trying not to show her crooked teeth. Would anyone not knowing what came later spot a hint of chemistry between them? They never spoke of how they fell in love or the war. He did recall once thinking over beers beneath a tree, a pretty neat kid. That's all I got, no matter how I asked. Another shot, she's laughing, but bending forward hugs her chest. So lovely, yet can't forget the camera, as if her body might betray her. Someone in New York broke her heart before the war, she said, trying to warn me off sex. Did she see him as safe, quiet, self-contained yet teasing, with a sudden flash of wit? His eyes are only for his sandwich. I wish he'd turn and smile at her. Final pose, the two of them. Wind blown in their army shirts on a boat, sea and sky whited out. Too faint for me to overhear, and years too late to ask for the story. Now mother leans against him with a smile, and he looks at the camera grinning. Young, arrested, unknowable as gods on a temple wall. So I'm looking at the time. I will read one more and then we'll see if there are a question or two if we have time. This is a doctor poem about an encounter with a patient. I volunteer as a doctor at a safety net clinic, and this poem was from a long time ago. This is the one that was in the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's called Ignacio's Foot. I know this foot, the sturdy stump that ends mid-instep in a calloused knob, the horny yellow skin slammed with each step against the sole of your salted working boot. I remember toes turning dusky like summer plums, the innocent looking wound launching bacteria to melt your flesh. On your x-rays, infection's shadow crept up the bones till I sent you by taxi to the hospital, where a surgeon lopped off the darkened, rotting half. Mornings since your daughter took you in, you limp beside your grandson to the bus, clean the house, scrape together dollars to pay your fare. Today you greet me with a toothless smile and show your numbers, high watermarks of sugar in the blood. Tenderly, you unswaddle the stump, present it for my inspection. Look, perfecto. Next time you see me here, I will walk in with a woman on my arm. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Three wonderful poets: John Odell, Reuben Jackson, and Susan Okie. Let's give them another hand. Thank you all for coming. Looks like we're going to have to we've just about run out of time. I hope you enjoyed this evening's readers, and I hope that you will extend your enjoyment by purchasing the books of these readers and letting others know about this series. I will put those links back into the chat one more time. And please come out on Monday, July 12, 2021, when Cafe Muse Online will present Written in Arlington with Catherine Young. And we'll see you again here on Poets versus the Pandemic on July 21st with Miles David Moore, Linda Marshall, and Ann Becker in a themed night tribute to the people who put on poetry events here in the DC area. So until that time, I want to say good night and stay safe. Thank you all.